Today, we bring you an incredible story, the tale of a man who survived and lived adrift at sea for an astonishing 438 days. This currently stands as the world record for the longest time a person has endured being lost at sea. Let's explore his unbelievable journey and try to understand the hardships this man endured. First, let's take a moment to appreciate the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. It's the largest ocean on Earth, covering nearly a third of the planet's surface. To put that into perspective, if you combined all the land on Earth and compared it to the Pacific, the ocean would still dwarf it. The Pacific is largely empty, dotted only by a few scattered islands. If you were to get lost there, the odds of being found are nearly zero. And that's what makes today's story so astonishing. Our story is about a man named José Salvador Alvarenga, a fisherman from El Salvador, a small country in Central America. Alvarenga holds the record for the longest time anyone has ever survived being lost at sea, a record no one in their right mind would ever want to break. He certainly didn't plan to achieve this feat. The events that unfolded during his ordeal will leave you scratching your head, wondering how on earth he managed to survive for so long. At 438 days, Alvarenga's record seems unbreakable, simply because the chances of someone surviving that long again are slim. Most people would die long before they reached such a milestone. His nightmare began with what was supposed to be a straightforward two-day fishing trip. Alvarenga, an experienced fisherman, usually went out to sea with a trusted partner. But on this particular day, his partner couldn't make it. Left without an option, Alvarenga recruited a 23-year-old novice named Ezequiel Cordoba to join him. The trip began on November 17, 2012, from their small coastal village of Costa Azul, located on the Pacific coast of Mexico. The plan was simple, a 30-hour fishing trip. They set out in a small, basic fishing boat that was completely ill-equipped for what lay ahead. The boat was just 23 feet long, with no roof, no cabin, just an exposed motor. Their supplies were minimal, consisting only of fishing gear and a cooler for storing their catch. There had been warnings of an approaching storm, but financial pressures likely pushed them to take the risk. They ventured more than 75 miles offshore, heading to fertile fishing waters. By 1 a.m., the storm hit, raging with enough force to threaten the small boat. Desperate to stay afloat, they threw most of their equipment and even their early catch overboard to lighten the load and give themselves a fighting chance. At dawn, they were tantalizingly close to shore, just 15 miles away, and could even see the silhouette of mountains in the distance. But then disaster struck. Their motor gave out completely, leaving them powerless. With no paddles, no sails, and no way to maneuver, the relentless storm winds and ocean currents began dragging them farther and farther out to sea. At first, they clung to a sliver of hope. They still had a radio and managed to contact their employer, reporting their situation and location. Their employer promised to send help and alerted the Coast Guard. But before the rescue could begin, the radio battery died, cutting off their last link to the outside world. Imagine being in their shoes, watching the coastline slowly disappear while realizing you have no way to call for help. Surrounded by endless water in every direction, with no land in sight, and nothing but each other and a small boat to rely on, their journey into survival had only just begun. They knew a storm was heading toward their region, but their circumstances left them with little choice. They needed to earn a living, so they decided to take their chances and ventured over 120 kilometers, about 75 miles offshore, to their usual fishing spot. By 1 a.m., the storm hit them with full force, threatening to capsize their small boat. In their panic and desperation to survive, they began throwing overboard most of their gear, equipment worth thousands of dollars, and even the fish they had caught. They needed to lighten the load to keep their boat afloat and maneuverable. At that point, they were about 6 hours from shore. Battling the storm throughout the night, they made a desperate attempt to return to land. By 7 a.m., they had managed to get within 24 kilometers, 15 miles of the coast, and could even see the mountains on the horizon. But then, disaster struck. Their engine failed completely, leaving them without any means of propulsion, no paddles, no sails, nothing. The winds and waves of the storm took control, dragging them farther and farther out into the open ocean, powerless to resist. For a brief moment, they had a glimmer of hope. They had a radio on board and managed to contact their employer, who was still close enough to hear their signal. They explained their situation and location, and their employer reassured them that he would send help immediately. He also contacted the Coast Guard to launch a rescue operation. But before they could organize a rescue, the radio battery died, cutting off their final lifeline. In an instant, their last connection to the outside world disappeared. Imagine being in their position, watching the shoreline you had fought so hard to reach slowly vanish from view, the mountains fading into the horizon, while the winds and currents drag you deeper into the vast, empty ocean. The isolation, the helplessness, it's hard to fathom the depth of despair they must have felt in that moment. Their employer acted quickly, rallying other fishermen to search for them while the Coast Guard deployed boats and helicopters. For days, they scoured the sea, but the storm and currents had already carried the small boat far away. Within 5 days, the boat had drifted over 450 kilometers to 180 miles from the coast. Out in the open ocean, surrounded by nothing but water, their tiny boat was almost impossible to spot. From the air, it was nearly invisible, especially without bright colors or signals like flares. They had no tools to attract attention, not even a brightly colored cloth. All they had were their hands to wave desperately at the sky. They realized the chance of rescue was almost non-existent. Despite their dwindling supplies and the hopelessness of their situation, survival instincts kicked in. At first, they improvised ways to adapt. They began catching fish and seabirds with their bare hands, eating them raw. They scavenged plastic bottles floating in the ocean and used them to collect rainwater. But during long dry spells without rain, they were forced to drink turtle blood or, in extreme desperation, even their own urine. Drinking urine, of course, provides no real benefit and is harmful in the long run, but in such extreme circumstances, survival can drive people to unimaginable choices. It's hard to say what anyone would do in their place. The days stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months. Imagine spending all that time on a cramped, 7-meter 23-foot boat, with only one other person to talk to, and nothing to occupy your mind except catching fish. Such conditions would drive anyone to the brink of madness. According to Alvarenga, his young companion, Cordoba, began to lose his grip on reality after just 4 months. His mental health rapidly deteriorated, and he even started contemplating suicide. As time passed, Cordoba's physical health also declined. The raw food they were forced to eat caused severe illness, and he eventually became too weak to eat at all. His body wasted away, and his condition worsened until, finally, he succumbed to the unimaginable hardships and passed away. 4 months passed, and Alvarenga lost the only companion he had. Now completely alone, he faced an even more grueling challenge: survival. The loneliness of being adrift in the middle of the ocean was crushing. Imagine being surrounded by endless water, with no land in sight and no one to talk to. It's hard to fathom what Alvarenga had to do to keep his sanity during this time. At this point, he was drifting in the heart of the Pacific Ocean, one of the most desolate places on Earth. Ships rarely pass through such areas, but, according to Alvarenga, a cargo ship did cross his path during his solitude. He screamed, waved, and desperately tried to get their attention. There were 4 crew members on the deck, and they saw him. They even waved back. Yet the ship continued on its course without stopping. Imagine his mental state at that moment. After months of being lost, seeing a ship must have felt like salvation, only for his hope to be shattered in an instant. Alvarenga later admitted that he seriously considered ending his life on 2 occasions. He said, "I held a knife to my throat, ready to do it, but I was terrified of death and the pain it would bring." By this time, 11 months had passed, and Alvarenga had drifted over 8,000 kilometers in his tiny boat. His clothes were in tatters, he had only a piece of cloth to shield himself from the relentless sun, and he remained utterly alone in the vast ocean. For several more months, he continued to endure this unimaginable ordeal, bringing his total time lost at sea to around 14 months. Then, one fateful day, Alvarenga noticed coconuts floating in the water and an increase in the number of birds overhead. He knew this meant land was nearby. It took him nearly half a day before the outline of an island finally came into view. Deciding to take a chance, he jumped from his boat and swam toward it. At first, he thought it was an uninhabited island, but he soon discovered a house and called out for help. For the first time in 438 days after traveling roughly 11,000 kilometers, he made contact with another human being. The island he reached was called Ebon Atoll, located near the Philippines. If fate hadn't guided him there, he might not have seen land until reaching the Philippines itself, which was still more than 5,000 kilometers away. Reaching it would have taken him an estimated 240 additional days, something he likely wouldn't have survived. After news of his rescue spread, authorities flew him back to his home country. Once he recovered and gained significant media attention, Alvarenga decided to write a book detailing his incredible story of survival. However, Controversy followed. The family of his young companion, Cordoba, accused him of killing their son to survive and even filed a lawsuit against him. The idea wasn't entirely far-fetched, as there are documented cases of survivors resorting to cannibalism in desperate situations. Given the extreme physical and psychological conditions of being lost at sea, such actions aren't beyond the realm of possibility. Of course, Alvarenga denied the accusations, as anyone likely would, but the truth of what happened on that boat remains a mystery one only Alvarenga knows for sure. What do you think? Is it possible that he did what he had to in order to survive? Share your thoughts in the comments below. That's it for today's video. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, smash that like button, and share this video as much as you can. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care.